I want to start out with a question. What team is this? If you guessed McLaren, yeah, you're correct. It's totally McLaren. But how did you know that? That's essentially what I want to uncover in this video, talking about branding in Motorsports 101 specifically, because there's a lot of different facets of branding. Specifically, I want to talk about brand identity design, because that does tend to be the most prominent form of branding and how we experience a brand in motorsports. All right, before we dive in though, I think it's worth defining what a brand actually is. A lot of people, especially in motorsports, they think that, a brand equals a livery, or a brand equals the website user interface, or a brand equals a logo, and none of that is actually true. To give you a rough analogy, to say that a brand is, let's say, a logo is kind of like saying that a roll cage is a race car. It kind of looks like a race car, and it's a key component in a race car, but it is inherently not on its own a race car. So that's kind of a good analogy to get you started in thinking about what a brand is. So let's properly define it though. I think it's going to surprise a lot of people. A brand is simply how other people interpret you. And that's it. There's not much more to it. The real question though becomes, how do we shape that perception through the process of branding so that your business can get closer to whatever its goal might be? That's more or less what we're going to get into, specifically in the motorsports domain. So think of it like this. If you play in every single domain and you are visually, speaking of course only to the brand identity, which is the visual aspect only, if you are visually consistent across every single domain that you occupy, then it's much easier for your target audience, target customer, whoever that might be, to simply identify you. That's all. No matter where you are, they can be like, oh, that's so-and-so. And that's basically what happened when I started the video showing just that standalone piece of collateral from McLaren. You immediately were like, oh, McLaren. Why did that work? Because they've established their identity visually in so many different places, and they've been so consistent throughout the entire process that you've come to just recognize that without any logo, without any verbiage, without any marks on the page, to be like, that's a piece of McLaren content. And that's a really powerful tool, by the way, just to have that recognition no matter where you go, because now you don't have to worry about that really as a factor in determining whether or not people are actually properly identifying you in whatever domain you might occupy. So that is the first reason. All right, moving on to the second reason, and that is the ability to scale, and to scale effectively for that matter. So what do I mean by scale? If you think of the brand and all the visual assets that come with it, they might work really well in one area, let's say the website, for example, that you have, but maybe they don't scale at all on social media, or maybe they don't work at all on the side of a race car, or maybe they don't work on the side of your hauler, whatever the case might be. Scaling just means you can take the same exact assets that identify you in one place, and they will identify you just as well in any other place you take it. So the ability to scale is really useful, especially when the company grows or just moves into other domains for that matter, so that you're consistently identifiable no matter where you go. And that just sort of kind of brings us back to the first part, which was consistency, but scale simply refers to the ability to be identifiable in a cross-domain situation without any confusion. Okay, the third piece in all of this, as far as building out brand identity goes, is recognizability. This kind of plays into the first two, but it's different in the sense that when we say recognizability, what I actually mean is differentiation to an extent. So it's great if you can scale, and it's great if you're recognized everywhere, but if people are confusing it for something else, or it's just too bland, or it's not really standing out, or it doesn't really convey what you're hoping to convey as far as your visual identity goes, it can sometimes blend into the crowd and be tougher to spot. And this is really important, especially in motorsports, when literally all the brands come together at the track and you're in a sea of brands. How are you going to stand out? What's going to be your differentiator? What about you makes you different? In our case, specifically our studio, the reason we picked teal, which is a really unusual color in racing, is because it's a really unusual color in racing. A lot of people just stick to the basic solids for the most part, but in our case we were like, well, if we're going to stand out, especially as a decal on a car, which we're on, dozens of cars, having a teal decal that stands out. People catch that. And so that's kind of why we chose that colorway. Of course, that's just us. In any scenario where we're working with someone, it's going to be, there's a whole different set of guidelines we're going to go by. But that's just a really simplistic example of kind of how we went about using it. All right, let's circle it back to the original question. Why is this even important? And really, the whole point of branding is to make the job of marketing a lot easier. And that's pretty much it. I like to think of a brand and all of its visual assets, forgetting of the other assets that are not strictly tied to the visual aspect, but just all of the visual things that come with it. Those are all, technically speaking, they're all variables. If you think of marketing as a set of variables, you don't want any black boxes in the system, right? You want the whole thing to be as consistent as possible so that you have more control over the actual marketing itself. So the marketing itself becomes more predictable the less variables you have. So if the brand aspect is built solid, and you know it scales effectively, and you know it communicates effectively, and you know that people are recognizing it, it's not getting confused, those are all variables in a system that you are essentially eliminating. And it's really all about kind of how many variables can we get out of the system so that the information that you get from your actual marketing becomes a lot more clear, and you're not wondering whether or not the black box of your brand is causing issues, or the black box of scale, or whatever the case might be. We want to get rid of those so that there's just cleaner information at the end of the day. That is truly why people invest a lot in this, is because they need better information. And that's really what kind of creating a solid identity helps people get closer to. So if you've ever wondered, why do companies, especially in motorsports, spend so much on brand and brand recognition? That's pretty much why. That's I think a good summary of kind of how the whole thing works. And it's especially important in motorsports where, like I said, you have so many different brands all in the same spot. It's a really rare scenario too. Like in other sports, we don't see this as much, but in motorsports, everyone comes to play on the field on the same day at the same place and on the same network. So as a result, there's a lot more value in being all of the former attributes that I listed when you're competing with everyone at the same time. Again, going back to the original example, the fact that you were able to take that image and in your mind translate that somehow into, oh, that's McLaren. I think that's pretty impressive. Anyway, to close out, my name is Sam Pollock. I'm the owner of Grand Prix Studio, and this YouTube channel is simply about everything that I've learned running a studio within motorsports, and I'm just kind of putting it out there for anyone who might find it useful or helpful. Hopefully it's of value to you. If you like it, subscribe, you know what to do, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.